Well, voters in 3 states weighing in on the 2016 presidential race last night. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton clinching a win in Arizona, but Bernie Sanders taking Utah and Idaho and coming away with more delegates than Clinton for the night. On the Republican side, Donald Trump taking Arizona and Ted Cruz winning the Utah caucuses. Cruz also picking up the endorsement of former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. In the meantime, a new Quinnipiac national poll shows Donald Trump with 43%. That's a commanding lead over Ted Cruz, who has a 29% polling rating, and John Kasich at 16%. I'm going to go to Arizona's favorite daughter, Ms. Katie Pavlich. Katie, Donald Trump winning pretty clearly in Arizona last night. Ted Cruz, though, he racked up some delegates in Utah. Where do you see the GOP race headed now? Is Donald Trump the inevitable front runner, or are you hearing that they're going to do everything it appears to stop him?
Well, I think if you look at the delegate count, it's going to be very difficult for either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz to get to the magic 1237 before this is all over in June. The math doesn't add up to either one of them necessarily winning unless something changes and unless Donald Trump can get more support as we go through the next couple of months. It's not surprising that Donald Trump won in Arizona. I do think it's ironic that John McCain won his Senate re-election by saying we need to build the dang wall, and yet here's Donald Trump saying essentially the same things and adding that the Mexicans will pay for it. So that is an interesting thing that they have in common. But illegal immigration in Arizona is a very serious issue. It affects the healthcare system, the education system, the public safety situation there. So that's not surprising. I do think it's very interesting to look at how Ted Cruz won in Utah based on the type of Republican that lives in Utah and voted for him. Mitt Romney, I think, helped him there. He won a significant portion, 71% of the vote. And so the map moving into, the more of the Rust Belt northeastern states is going to be more difficult for Ted Cruz, I think. However, that doesn't mean the delegate count will add up for Donald Trump at the end of the day. So I think that we're probably headed to a brokered convention.
Brokered convention, Guy Benson.
Could be.
Could be, right?
Oh,
so Ted Cruz was here last night. Got to say hello to him in the green room, and he told me he's feeling very good about it. But what about the math? Guy, the only pathway I see is it has to be a brokered convention for Cruz.
Well, excuse me, Guy. Gosh, I feel like it's almost personal, but it's not. It's breaking news, my friend. And breaking news right now from that bilateral joint conference in Argentina. The president just took a question about our fight against ISIS, and after what happened in Brussels, let's watch.
Our priority is to defeat ISIL and to eliminate the scourge of this barbaric terrorism that's been taking place around the world. And we see high-profile attacks in Europe, but they're also killing Muslims throughout the Middle East, people who are innocent, people who are guilty only of worshiping Islam in a different way than this organization. They are poisoning the minds of young people everywhere, not just in Europe, but in the United States and undoubtedly in Argentina. People are looking on these websites. So there's no more important item on my agenda than going after them and defeating them. The issue is, how do we do it in an intelligent way? And our approach has been continuously to adjust to see what works and what doesn't. What has been working is the airstrikes that we're taking on their leadership, on their infrastructure, on their financial systems. What has been working is special operators partnering with Iraqi security forces and going after leadership networks and couriers and disrupting the connection between their bases in Raqqa and their bases in Mosul. We've recovered, taken away from ISIL about 40% of their territory, and ISIL's leadership has been hunkered down, and we are going to continue to press on them until we have driven them out of their strongholds and until they're destroyed. While we are doing that, we're also extraordinarily vigilant about preventing attacks in our homeland and working with our allies to prevent attacks in places like Europe. But as I've said before, this is difficult work. It's not because we don't have the best and the brightest working on it. It's not because we are not taking the threat seriously. It is because it's challenging to find, identify very small groups of people who are willing to die themselves and can walk into a crowd and detonate a bomb. And my charge to my team is to find every strategy possible to successfully reduce the risk of such terrorist attacks, even as we go after their beating heart in places like Iraq and Syria. And as our strategy evolves and we see additional opportunities, we will go after it. But what we don't do, and what we should not do, is take approaches that are going to be counterproductive. So when I hear somebody saying we should carpet bomb Iraq or Syria, not only is that inhumane, not only is that contrary to our values, but that would likely be an extraordinary mechanism for ISIL to recruit more people willing to die and explode bombs in an airport or in a metro station. That's not a smart strategy. As far as what some candidates have said, I think I've been very clear on this. One of the great strengths of the United States, and part of the reason why we have not seen more attacks in the United States, is we have a extraordinarily successful, patriotic, integrated Muslim American community. They do not feel ghettoized. They do not feel isolated. Their children are our children's friends, going to the same schools. They are our colleagues in our workplaces. They are our men and women in uniform, fighting for our freedom. And so any approach that would single them out or target them for discrimination is not only wrong and un-American, but it also would be counterproductive, because it would reduce the strength, the antibodies that we have to resist terrorism. As far as the notion of having surveillance of neighborhoods where Muslims are present, I just left a country that engages in that kind of neighborhood surveillance, which, by the way, the father of Senator Cruz escaped for America, the land of the free. The notion that we would start down that slippery slope makes absolutely no sense. It's contrary to who we are. And it's not going to help us defeat ISIL. Last point I'll make on this, I understand when we see the sight of these kinds of attacks, our hearts bleed, because we know that could be our children. That could be our family members or our friends or our co-workers who travel to a place like Brussels. And it scares the American people. And it horrifies me. I've got two young daughters who are growing up a little too fast, and I want them to have the freedom to move and to travel around the world without the possibility that they'd be killed. So I understand why this is the top priority of the American people, and I want them to understand this is my top priority as well. It is the top priority of my national security team. It is the top priority of our military. It is the top priority of our intelligence officers. It is the top priority of our diplomats. But we are approaching this in a way that has a chance of working. And it will work. And we're not going to do things that are counterproductive simply because it's political season. We're going to be steady. We're going to be resolute. And ultimately, we're going to be successful.
Excuse me, but I don't think that it will help in any sense that I advance any opinion about what we are going to find. Let's wait, study the documentation, and then we can do some comments on it. Thank you.
Seguidamente, preguntar a Martín Di Natale.
Next, a question from Martín Di Natale.
All right, so we are continuing to watch this news conference, and you saw President Obama answering several questions there that had been put forth by a reporter kind of in a staccato fashion, touching on some of the Republican presidential candidates' criticism of him since the Brussels attacks and being abroad and not coming home, and his thoughts about that, and also just in general our strategy for fighting ISIS. And we will kind of go back and forth. We do have the translator there, so we're able to monitor this, and at those key points we'll take you back. The issue, the president says, is how do we deal with finding a strategy to fight ISIS, or ISIL as he says, in an intelligent way. And I saw you sit back very pensively. Your thoughts?
Well, he talked about, and this is a refrain we hear a lot from this president on a number of issues, which is we're really just focused on what works. We're pragmatists, and we're interested in what's effective. The problem is, and this went to the top of the show, and the quote that we used from the former CIA deputy chief, Mike Morrell, who is saying openly on national television that ISIS is winning. So what we are doing is not what works. And then we just heard moments ago the president saying that his top priority is defeating ISIS. And I hope that's true. The problem is, when you talk to the intelligence community, when you talk to a lot of sources, the priority of this administration was politics when it came to the genesis and spreading of ISIS to begin with, and then allegedly, according to dozens of spies, talking to the Daily Beast in September, cooking the books on intelligence to make it seem like we were gaining and advancing better against ISIS in the fight than we actually are. Those are contradictory cross-currents compared to what we just heard from our president.
Well, and the crisis point in all of that wasn't just that those books were being scrubbed, but the pressure that was put on the people who were actually in the field doing the work to scrub the books.
And why? For politics.
So one of the things that the president said, Katie, was, you know, they're hunkered down, meaning ISIS in Syria and Iraq. We're going to drive them out. We're still trying strategies. You know, do you need 19 strategies? You've got some of the best military leadership on the planet. Can't you just come up with maybe one or two?
Well, the fact is that the military community and the top generals have given Barack Obama, the president, a strategy, and he's rejected it. He has instead decided to put the advice of lawyers who are working in the White House to micromanage what is going on the battlefield to be in charge, rather than the plan that the generals have presented. And I'm with Guy. I would hope that this would be a top priority of the administration. But based on the results and based on the attitude that the president has, including the fact that he, again, went to the baseball game yesterday instead of at least showing that he was interested in making sure the American people have some resolve when there's been a major terrorist attack where Americans are missing in Brussels, and for him to say that they're contained is just completely opposite of the facts. You look at the map, they're all over Iraq and Syria, they're all over Europe, and as Andrea has repeatedly pointed out on the show, the FBI has confirmed that they are here, they are working on hundreds, if not thousands of leads, and yet the administration is saying, we're still working on something that's going to work. Well, it's not working and people's lives are at stake as a result of it.
If they weren't here, we wouldn't see the presence that we see, because we are very close to Times Square here. And so I'm sure our viewers, I see it on Twitter all the time, we can see the police presence behind you. They know that we are being, you know, protected here in New York City and some of our other major areas, but it doesn't have to happen there. It can happen in San Bernardino, too. I want to move on to the president mentioning Senator Ted Cruz by name as he was talking about how best to deal with the Muslims and rooting out radical Islam. I'm putting words in his mouth now. He's just trying to find the extremists, but I'm saying within that Muslim community, finding that radical arm. And he says, well, you can't ghettoize the Muslim people in this country, Andrea, and he specifically called out Ted Cruz.
He did, and that was a reference to Ted Cruz saying that we need to profile, which is something that also Donald Trump has said. It's very, very successful, it's very effective, and it was very effective right here in New York City after the attacks of 9/11. What happened, though, is Mayor Bill de Blasio, a Democrat and a Clintonite, he dismantled that entire program that kept New Yorkers safe for years. Not only that, Harris, just a couple months ago, the ACLU filed a lawsuit on behalf of 3 Muslims in New York City. So now that they can sue the NYPD, and not just the force, they can sue individual officers if they feel that they are being wrongly targeted. This program was highly successful. There's a number of radicalized mosques that the police has pointed to. They only do it if they believe there's suspicious terrorist activity. The president, so taking a shot at Ted Cruz for that, and then taking a shot at Senator Cruz for saying that we should be carpet bombing. Now, I don't believe that carpet bombing is the right strategy for this specific enemy, rolling out a wave of carpets. I think it needs to be more targeted munitions this time around. But Cruz is right. Something needs to be done aggressively. Trump is also right when he talks about immigration. What Obama is missing, though, I mean, while he's releasing terrorists from Gitmo, he's talking about things like enhanced interrogation that his own administration said was legal. So Trump talks about waterboarding. That is enhanced interrogation.
Right.
The administration says that it's legal. Also, it's a bit of cognitive dissonance from a president who thinks waterboarding is not okay, but droning is. And killing innocents with drones are okay. I mean, President Obama makes absolutely no sense when he talks about the war on terror.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Rachel, because, well, and you made it earlier, because with the oil fields, when we had an opportunity to hit some of those trucks, when the Islamic State savages were putting together their money by securing those oil revenues as they were moving across Iraq and Syria, the president didn't do that.
Right. The military asked.
They took out a few.
They asked to bomb them, and they said no because we don't know if the drivers are, you know, forced to drive if they're really ISIS fighters, and so they didn't want to do it.
Climate change. They don't want to disrupt
and also
the environment.
There's climate change. But you want to go back to your point you made about the ghettoization and all this stuff about surveilling in those communities. We need to take back the word assimilation and stop making it a bad word. It's not a bad word. We are Americans. We ought to be proud of our culture, of our freedoms, of the way we treat women. And people who come here from wherever they come ought to feel a lot of peer pressure nationally to adopt to our ways. If you want to come here, we treat women a certain way. We care about freedoms. We don't like Sharia law. We believe in the Constitution. And by the way, that assimilation is what allowed my family, who is Hispanic, we assimilated and proudly, and that's how you get the American dream. We're doing no favors to Muslims or any immigrants who come here by making assimilation to American values and American culture a bad word.
All right, we'll move on. But no doubt come back to this because the news conference is ongoing. We're still covering it. But before we take you to a break, we want to show you another live picture that's happening, this one from Brussels. The world remembers. I know President Obama said that we have fear or our hearts bleed, I believe he said, because we could see our own family, our friends in this. But we also feel hearted and heart-scratched about this because we're human. And so we're with them in prayer and thoughts. We'll have a live report on exactly what's happening in that enormous manhunt now. Several suspected terrorists after the attacks to keep the people safe there. We'll be right back.